I'm sure you all know that there are two Noahs in the Bible. The one that Wallace talked about last week, and then there is one who is a lady, and she's in Joshua 17:3, and she's the daughter of Zelophehad. Now, I'm assuming that I'm supposed to teach on one of those Noahs. So I looked at the Sunday school lesson, and it was the Noah that Wallace talked about last week. So, Wallace taught last week, and Nancy teaches next week, and today we are talking about Noah in Genesis 7. Last week, Wallace built the ark for us, and not long from now, we're going to go up and see it, or see a replica of it. The ark was a huge boat, 150 feet longer than the football field. That helped me understand how big that thing was, and I'll just look back. It's 75 feet wide. A football field's 168 feet wide, so it's a little less than half. But it was 45 feet high and 3 levels. So we've got this huge ship. And I had always, and Wallace helped me,
Yeah,
Noah, it was 120 years to build the ark.
yeah, 120 years.
But I looked up some things, and they were arguing about how long it was. How long it was a big ark, and it took him a long time to build it. The other thing, how old was Noah when he built the ark?
400 something, I guess. It says it was 600 when he entered the ark.
He was 600 when he
Yeah.
entered the ark. And it took him 120 years, which was some argument about exactly how many years it took to build it. But, you know, that's interesting.
And he still wasn't the oldest guy that ever lived. His
No.
grandfather was named Methuselah.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
ring a bell?
Yes.
Yeah.
690-something years.
So, you know, our ages don't mean much. If you think somebody's 600 years old, and he actually lives after that, another 300 and something years. So,
Didn't they measure time differently back then?
I hope.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I mean, we could go back to that. Maybe all of us are 600 years old. Anyway, today we find the human wickedness had drawn God's notice and judgment, and Noah had built the ark to divine specifications. He was told by God how to build it and what to do, and Noah spent 120 years building it. So let's look at the first verses 1 through 5 of the ark of Genesis 7. Verse 1 says, "The Lord then said to Noah, 'Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation.'" Now think about who it is that's about to enter the ark, and we're about to have a flood. It was Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. So there's 6 people going in, 8 people going in. See, I can't count either. Genesis 7, God instructs Noah and his family to board the ark because I have found you righteous in this generation. So why is God going to flood the world?
Evil prevailed.
Evil prevailed. It did. And that was the reason for this. The divine affirmation of Noah's character resonates with the description given earlier in the story in chapter 6. Verse 9 says, "Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God." So we're seeing a godly man doing what God had told him to do, to build this ark, this huge ship. And now it's time to use that ship. Verse 2 says, "Take with you 7 of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 2 of every kind of unclean animal, a male of its mate, and also 7 of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth." There is a reason for the animals mentioned. There were 7 pairs of clean animals plus 1 pair of unclean animals. And the purpose of the additional clean animals is clarified after the flood. They were offered to God for a sacrifice. Now, when I read this lesson to Janie, I try to work on it, and then after I get it together, I'll read it to Janie, and if she goes to sleep, I know I need to read a little more. And with all of this good stuff I thought was in the lesson, what was the question? She asked and was concerned about what clean animals are and what are unclean animals.
I said, someone might ask.
Oh. Well, we were with another couple Friday night or Thursday night, and I mentioned about this, and the same question came up. So, what are unclean animals and what are clean animals?
Snakes would be unclean, I would think.
Well,
Earth animal.
I don't know.
yeah, well, I looked it up in the dictionary that Wallace told me about, that I love, and if you haven't a copy of that, you really would like it, because it's the best thing I've seen in a long time.
Bible dictionary.
It's a Bible dictionary. So I went to my illustrated dictionary of the Bible, and it said the most basic division of animal life, clean and unclean, was in effect very early in Israel's history. Clean animals, the Jews believed, were acceptable to God for sacrifices and were thus permitted as food. All others were considered unclean or unacceptable for sacrificing or eating. Distinguishing between clean and unclean animals was the responsibility of the priest. And if you're interested in really reading about this, it's Levi, the 11th chapter. But the priest was responsibility of distinguishing. Guidelines for this procedure were given in detail in Leviticus 11. Of the larger animals, God said, "Whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hoofs and chewing the cud, that you may eat." Birds were an important source of food, so the few unclean ones were listed. These were mostly scavenger birds that ate flesh. Though neighboring peoples ate lizards, snakes, and turtles, Jews considered all reptiles unclean.
Yeah.
Fish with scales and fins were clean, but shellfish, eels, and sharks were unclean. Most insects were unclean, with the exception of locusts, grasshoppers, and some beetles, which could be eaten. So I guess, Walker, the mosquitoes were probably unclean. And that should take care of this issue at this time, because I don't think it's important for the lesson, too important for the lesson. Anyone interested in the lesson on clean animals and unclean animals, I guess we could have a lesson. Wallace, would you and
No,
Nancy
no,
want to do that?
necessary.
So,
It's
I
not
think we'll just
necessary.
get rid of those. Now, let's look at verse 4. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Can you imagine 40 days and 40 nights of rain? How many of you have been in a hurricane?
More
Okay.
than one.
Yeah. Janie lived in Miami, and I know she experienced a number of
Yeah.
hurricanes down there. I lived in Central Florida, and we had a number of that came. My dad was a railroad man, and hurricanes came. Daddy had to get on the railroad track, so he was out. Grandma and Granddaddy would come up and stay with us, but it was something to worry. And here we've got, but those never lasted 40 days and 40 nights. But here we've got the storm, or the rain will be 40 days and 40 nights. Verse 4, "And I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made." Now what's happening here?
God's house cleaning.
God's house cleaning. It is. It's starting all over, isn't it? Because they're going to wipe out everybody and everything that was not in this ark. And that's 8 people and those animals. I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. Noah had already obeyed God's instructions in building the ark. That was his job. Now God provides additional details regarding the timing and nature of the earth's destruction. It will begin, God is telling Noah, it will begin in 7 days, so get on the ark. The Lord emphasizes the devastating effect. Everything will be blotted out from the face of the ground. There is urgency in this countdown to the flood, but no rush, no reason to hurry. There's a time for everything that needs to be done before the deluge starts. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Now, what are we seeing what are we seeing Noah doing here? Can you imagine having to build something for 120 years?
Well, how did he get all those animals and insects and put it together?
But and that was a good question.
Yeah,
Whose
it is.
responsibility was that?
God's.
God's,
God's
yeah.
responsibility.
Good, yeah.
What did God tell Noah to do? God told Noah to build the ark. And that's what Noah did. Now it's time to load those animals on the ark. And we know that it was God that got the animals, all of them that were there. How many animals were there? Pardon?
A bunch.
A bunch.
There were a bunch of animals. There were a bunch. Anybody want to take a guess? Well, I looked it up, and the one suggestion I found, it said there were 45,000 animals on the ark. How would you like to be 8 of y'all in an ark that's 150 feet longer than the football field, 75 feet wide, and you hope they're not on the same level that you are. There's 3 levels.
Yeah. No.
But, it kind of got to me. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. A catastrophic event is about to take place, and Noah responds by remaining details with characteristic obedience. He did what God told him to do. Time and again, this passage, and Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Time and again, that passage of one man is stark contrast to the rest of humanity. It's written 3 different times in chapter 7. Verse 5 is what we read here, and Noah did what the Lord commanded him. And then verse 7-9, as God had commanded Noah. And verse 16, as God commanded Noah. So Noah is following exactly what God is telling him to do. Noah doesn't know all that's about to take place. It doesn't hinder his obedience. The threefold refrain, as God had commanded him, emphasizes the fact that Noah's faithfulness leads to his salvation. So Noah was faithful in what God is telling him to do. Verse 6, Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came on earth. In verse 7, Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives entered the ark to escape the waters of the flood. Verses 8 and 9, pairs of clean and unclean animals, birds, and of all creatures that move along the ground, male and female, came to Noah and entered the ark as God had commanded Noah. Can you imagine how that took place? I mean, there's a door, and Noah and his family are going to go on there, but 45,000 animals are going to get on there with him. I mean, that would be a parade, wouldn't it?
I wonder if they have a septic tank in there.
They had to have something.
Yeah, something.
They had to have something.
God can work miracles.
God was
That's
working,
right.
God was working miracles.
That's the story. But people, you talk to some people, you talk to people that are not Christians and they're educated.
Yeah.
And they're saying to you, okay, now you got 45,000. How long were they on the ark?
40 days and 40 nights.
40 days, is that what it is?
No, he's gonna get to that.
Over 300 days.
Okay, over 300 days. Okay, now let's just
Over a year.
let's just figure we need oats for the 2 donkeys.
Yeah, he's an engineer.
How much oats, how do you feed those
Yeah,
things
right.
for 40 days? Now, go back this way. if you just do the things that we can sort of understand in cosmology and the universe and just this thing here. If God can go like that and all of this appears and everything's traveling around at 93 million miles of
Yeah.
what it is, with the speed of light and all that kind of stuff, don't worry about
Yeah.
the small stuff.
I was glad that we didn't get into heaven,
Yeah.
how we're gonna feed 45,000.
Yeah.
But if God could round them up,
Yeah.
which is what he
Yeah.
had done,
That's it.
then he could
can
also
take
get
care
them
of
fed.
The fact is that God, some instant in time, wiped everything out and started with a clean slate.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what we're starting. And after the 7 days, the flood waters came on the earth. Verse 10. Verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, and on the 17th day of the second month. How specific is this getting? Very specific. On the 600th year of Noah's life, and on the 17th day of the second month, and on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Have you ever been in a flood? I mean, I've had water come up, but never a flood. The narrative offers a remarkable record of specificity, and the details refer to the exact moment of the earth's demise. And that's what's happening here. Everything's being wiped out except for the people in this boat. This is the beginning of the end for all the inhabitants of the earth. But it also represents the beginning of God's provision of salvation for those inside the ark. Now, what about the role? And I'm not going to do that because Nancy's got that. That was the interesting thing that Wallace and Nancy and me had in trying to put together this lesson. Wallace taught building the boat, and I taught the water. Now, Nancy's going to teach next week what happens between the time the water stops and they get off the boat. And then I get to do the rainbow.
A whole lesson.
So,
Yeah, how you gonna do that whole lesson on the rainbow?
Wallace said I needed
Tap
Had
dance.
you
Tap
thought about-
dance.
Tap dance, yeah.
if you know that I don't tap dance, I don't even dance well. Oh, and the rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The duration of the rains falling on the earth is 40 days and 40 nights, and only those who remain in the ark will survive. It's not just the rain. The oceans came, the water underneath. So the water there had to be enough of this to cover the entire world. Mountains and all of that. And so what we've got is this boat floating along on top. The duration of the rains falling.
It was designed to float, wasn't it?
Pardon?
It was designed to only float.
Yes.
It wasn't like a.
It didn't have a motor.
No.
And it wasn't a submarine.
No.
No, it wasn't a submarine. It was just floating along.
It just floated.
It just floated. Probably didn't have any special stuff on it as far. The beginning of the rain signifies the destruction of the earth, but it also represents the beginning of God's provision for salvation. On that very day, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, together with his wife and the wives of his son, entered the ark. On the very same day, the biblical writer states, Noah, his family, and the roll call of creatures appointed to survive the flood entered the ark. This processional into the ark gives the occasion of a festive tone. But in contrast to the destruction about to take place for those outside it. Now, what do you think Noah and his family were thinking as they loaded that boat up with 45,000 animals and they got on it?
What are we doing?
Yeah, what are we doing? What are we gonna do?
The breaststroke.
Yes. And how long are we gonna be doing it? I can't imagine.
They had to have tremendous faith.
They had to
Yes.
have tremendous faith. They
Absolutely.
really did. And it says a lot about Noah and his 3 sons
Absolutely.
and the wives,
Right.
because they all got on that boat together. If you were Noah, how would you feel about being told that the flood was about to begin? I mean, you've been building this thing for 120 years. And now God says, okay, 7 days we're going to start raining. What would be your reaction?
Fear.
Fear?
Mm.
What else?
I would think that, I would be thinking after it was all over, we'd be the only people left on earth.
That's it.
Yeah.
Just these 8 people is all that's left.
Yeah, how does that? Everybody's going to be wiped
With
out,
animals.
but us 8 people.
Yeah.
We've got 8 people that are going to be left, and then we're going to start all over. Well, I'll
I'm
let
sure that meant a lot of their family and friends.
a lot of family and friends. Yeah, I mean, think about us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it was just our family, the immediate family, that's what it was the immediate family.
I hope they all got along.
If they're gonna stay on that boat for 300 and something days, they better get it. Oh,
I hope not animals too. Yeah, right.
yeah, hope they like animals. That's right. Well, I hope they've got good animals too.
Yeah.
The dogs are trained. I mean. Have you thought about what emotions might Noah and his family have experienced as they boarded the ark, knowing what's going to happen to the rest of the world? Now, Noah knew that the world was going to be wiped out. That's going to be tough, isn't it? I would think, it'd scare me to death, that the world's going to be wiped out and it's just going to be left Janie and John and Jason and Lizzie and Amy. And that would have to be before the grandkids got there.
They didn't have a house to live in either.
They won't have a house to live in, a car to drive, any of that.
Don't have Kroger?
Don't have Kroger, no. The Walmart was not there.
Gosh.
No food.
No
Yeah.
food. Anyway, and it was just a huge thing, but it shows the tremendous faith that Noah had in God. Well, let's look at the roll call of creatures appointed to survive the flood also enter the ark. All of them started. Verse 14 and 15, they had with them every wild animal. And we've talked about it, but I'm reading the verses as we go. All livestock according to their kinds, every creature that moves along the ground according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, everything with wings, and pairs of all creatures that have breath of life in them come to Noah, and they entered the ark. The animals going in were male and female of every living kind, as God commanded Noah. Then the Lord shut him in. Now how would you feel on that one? God closed the door. Noah didn't close it. God shut them in. The time comes for the door to be closed to ensure the safety of those inside, but Noah doesn't perform the final task. I think that would be a very tough moment, as you're now on it and God's closed the door and here comes the rain. And you've had 7 days to fill it up with 45,000 animals. What might it mean that God shut Noah and his family into the ark? Would that be encouraging to you? That God closed the door instead of you? I think it would.
I think
You know,
he
if
would
I-
have had a hard time closing it. I know I would have.
Yeah,
I would have just kept letting them come in.
yeah.
Because I don't think I could close the door on somebody.
You'd close it yourself. And here God is, by the way that God is closing the door, isn't God saying, okay, Adam, or Noah, I'm going to take care of you. This is what we plan to do. Now we're going to do it. And here it is. It'd be tough. It would be very tough, I think, to do that.
Did the ark have windows in it?
It did have a window. Wallace, you know more about the ark. I know that a window was opened later, it said.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people think that the boat was on Mount Ararat.
Yeah,
And anybody know what country that's in? That'd be a good, Iraq.
Oh, okay.
It's in Iraq, IRAQ.
mm.
Yeah, I looked it up.
I looked up.
Right, but they think but that was like thousands of feet high.
Yeah,
And they say, oh, and they found wood up
Yeah.
there. And people say, well, that's a part of the ark, but it's pretty dubious. Who knows?
yeah, we don't know.
I'm like Joanne, only God knows, you know.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
yeah. What might it mean that God shut Noah and his family in the ark? I'm like you, Susan. I think that I'd have a hard time closing the door.
Well, and plus Noah witnessed and tried to get those people for 120 years to
He did.
join him on that boat.
That's the other thing, that during that time, Noah didn't just go out and work on the boat, but he was also trying to get folks to follow God. And now is the time we're gonna close the door, and God closed it.
I'm sure everybody thought he was crazy.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, somebody comes and tells you, if you don't believe in God, in 120 years, he's gonna flood it and we're all gonna die. But you can come go with me. Go with God. What is that different than today? With our faith, we're not gonna get on a boat, I don't think, to float and die. But won't we eventually face God? And that's what these people on the earth will end up having to do. Many have wondered how the animal kingdom Roundup happened. I thought that was kind of interesting. You got all these animals. Did Noah and his son spend years collecting all the animals? In reality, the creation, along with Noah, was doing just as God had commanded. There seemed to be no problem gathering the animals. God took care of the details of that job while Noah was doing his part, building the ark. Often we do just the opposite of Noah. We worry about details over which we have no control while neglecting specific areas such as attitudes, relationships, and responsibilities that are under our control. Like Noah, concentrate on what God has given us to do and leave the rest to God. This final action of God is a fitting tribute to Noah's faithfulness. God initiated the means for salvation by warning Noah about the flood, giving him instructions for building the ark. Now God brings his saving work to completion by shutting the people and the creatures inside the ark. From beginning to end, God is directly involved in providing the means for salvation. After this moment of great emotion, devastation, and impending death, embodied faith first appears in the world. Noah demonstrates that he is willing to trust God despite everything that is going on around him. He continues to walk with God when the rest of humanity turned their backs to God. Noah's faithfulness makes him a recipient of God's favor. God gives the important task of rescuing life on earth not to an angel, but to a lone human being. God is the protagonist throughout the flood story, yet Noah's response in building the ark lets him participate in his own deliverance. Noah does not know how long his family will remain in the ark. He only knows that God has set him aside for an important purpose, and he has reminded God of that task. Now, Noah doesn't know how long he's going to be on the ark. And Nancy's going to tell us next week how long he's going to be on the ark. So I can't talk about that.
No.
But after Nancy gets you off the ark, then I'll tell you about the rainbow.
Something to look forward to.
Yes, something to look forward to. Our nation and our world have experienced several floods or storms through the years. Some of these have involved political unrest and international hostilities. Others have involved physical threats, diseases, droughts, and natural disasters. We have also experienced storms of a more personal nature in the form of relational conflicts, financial difficulties, health scares, and the like. Social, political, economic, and even personal challenges come at us like a flood. These difficulties can make us wonder where God is during these troubling times. At the time, these events are hard to understand, and we don't always know why certain things happen to us, to those around us. But one of the things that's been interesting to me as we go through, periodically we have real problems in the country. But being my age and your age, we can look back at times when the country or the world was in very difficult things. And we came through it. And God brought us through it. So that's one of the real advantages, I think, of us aging, is to see what God did through the period of our lives. One of the things that I did for years was keep a journal. And I would write in the morning and write what was going on. And our son has told me that when I die, what they're going to do is these journals that I've typed up, they're going to get a chute, because my office is on the second floor. They're going to shoot out of the window, and they're going to have a truck down there that'll shred them. So there's a which has been good, because a lot of the stuff I don't want them to read. But the advantage of that, to me, that's been so helpful, as I look back through it, I say, what am I going to do about so-and-so? Well, somehow I got through it. God took care of it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's what Noah is looking for. What are we going to do? Okay, God, I'm going to depend on you to get me through this. So how do storms we face challenge our understanding of God? I think as we go through these things and come past them, we can see that God was with us at that time. And so now when we have those problems, we can trust God to get us through it. Anybody have anything they'd like to add as we close? Well, it was an interesting time trying to put the lesson together. And then when the big question was about the animals. So let's close. Father, thank you so much for always being with us. Even when we don't know what's going to happen in the future, we know we can depend on you, and you will always be there. Bless us today. In Christ's name I pray.